What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingthepoised.com. Hope all is well over you. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and I know that you are excited because we have less than a week to go. Really, we just have a couple of days to go until the Dallas Cowboys start training camp out in Oxnard, California. It is a very exciting time. We are so excited ourselves for training camp coverage, for training camp discussion. We're upping our content game. We're going to have live shows all the time, a live show every single day. Live blog and the boys roundtables are back starting next week. We are very excited. And so, because training camp is effectively here, we figured it was time to kind of tie a bow on our training camp preview. For the last few weeks, we've been looking at each and every single position group on the Dallas Cowboys to kind of figure out how we feel about it, looking at the depth, looking at potential roster battles, looking at the way things may or may not shake out throughout the entire time in Oxnard and once the team is back in Frisco. And today we're not looking at a position group per se. Today we're looking at the coaching staff. And to be very clear, because we didn't want to get too nitty-gritty, we didn't want to get too lost in the weeds, we're looking at the head coach, Mike McCarthy, and each of the team's three coordinators, obviously offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, and special teams coordinator John Fassel. So with that being said, let's begin. Mike McCarthy is the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, entering his third season in that post. I will be honest with you, all right? My own personal experience with McCarthy, as far as thoughts about him as the Dallas Cowboys head coach, has ranged, and it has dwindled over time. I felt like the hire was solid in 2020. Obviously, he comes to town with a pretty impressive resume, a Super Bowl ring that is a pretty rare thing, and obviously something that us Cowboys fans have wanted to see for an extremely long time, on and on and on. I think that Mike McCarthy is generally pretty slept on or pretty disrespected. I think it depends how you want to look at that, but I think, and I've said this before, Mike McCarthy lost a PR battle to Aaron Rodgers. And the moment that happened, and you know what I'm talking about, the big expose about, how McCarthy wasn't involved in the game planning, was just kind of skating by, etc. I'm not at all here to sit and tell you that Aaron Rodgers was not an important factor, not an important piece, hasn't been an important piece in the success the Green Bay Packers have had, some of which has come at our expense as Dallas Cowboys fans. But I don't think it's fair to Mike McCarthy to characterize everything he did in Green Bay as simply a result of Aaron Rodgers' greatness. But because he lost that PR battle, everybody has decided that Mike McCarthy is just this fool. He is just this guy. He is just present. He is just hanging out and along for the ride. And people have kind of decided that's who he is with the Dallas Cowboys. And I don't think enough credit is given to Mike McCarthy for how he handles this specific job. He doesn't go about it the way that his predecessor did in Jason Garrett, but he does manage all of the many personalities that revolve around his job as the head coach of this specific team. And we've seen this team have success. I think it's fair. A year ago, people were sitting here saying, well, if the Cowboys don't have success in 2020, is Mike McCarthy going to be fired? That never made sense to me because the 2020 season was so obviously that this just kind of do-over with the fact that Dak Prescott got hurt, obviously the fact that, everybody was dealing with the onset of the pandemic, but it never felt like a fair shake from Mike McCarthy. So if you look at his career in Dallas, he's really had one season that is real, that we can properly and fairly evaluate, and it was last year. And so, obviously that take aged very well as the season wore on, as the Cowboys were having success throughout the 2021 season. The offense was moving, the defense was showing up, and a lot of people attributed that to Dan Quinn, right? And all that's true. There's enough credit to go around, but nobody ever really gave that credit to Mike McCarthy. And I know that he generally only makes headlines for the silly things like, there was the watermelon smashing, then the monkey butt, and things like that. But I still maintain that Mike McCarthy is underrated. Now, that being said, I am not a fan of the way things kind of fell apart down near the stretch of the season and into the playoffs. Obviously, nobody is, but I put that on McCarthy. I think that McCarthy has a big rebounding to do because we've all sat here and talked about how the Cowboys players kind of pointed fingers at and blamed officials for what happened, not just in the playoff loss to San Francisco, but after they lost to the Arizona Cardinals. There was a lot of that going on. I am a believer that stems from the head coach. Mike McCarthy was somebody who was pointing fingers at officials, and so that comes from him. Mike McCarthy, I wouldn't say lost the team, but Mike McCarthy just kind of lost it. And so I think that he is definitely being charged with fixing this problem that has plagued this team for a long time. And to be fair, that's why Mike McCarthy was hired, right? He was hired to do the thing that Jason Garrett could not do. He was hired to be the difference. This Cowboys team was capable of reaching the divisional round, but they were not capable of getting over that hump. He was brought in to do that. And until he does, he has failed at that job, obviously. And so I'm not as, I'm certainly not at the highest point I've ever been with McCarthy. I don't think he's trash. I don't think he's terrible. I do think he's underrated, and I think he's in a really difficult spot. I think that when you look at Mike McCarthy, he's obviously the head coach of this team, but he has to deal with Jerry Jones. He has to deal with Stephen Jones. He has to deal with the fact that this roster, and look, we're all rooting for this team. We're all rooting for these players, but he has to deal with the fact that this roster was weakened over the last few months. This roster on paper is weaker than it was when they lost in the playoffs to the 49ers. Now, that's not to say that they can't become better. That's not to say they can't have more success, but it's difficult. It's difficult to understand how Mike McCarthy is expected to have the type of success that we are expecting him to have with the decisions that have been made over the course of the last few months. As mentioned, it does seem to sort of set itself up with him being the fall guy for this season, right? I know that a lot of people believe that Sean Payton is next in line. The Cowboys are just tanking and ruining the season to hire Sean Payton. That has never been something that makes sense to me, but I do have a difficult time diffusing that. The locker room, the players, they all seem to gravitate towards Mike McCarthy. I think the vibes are positive in that sense, but there's no question that this season is somewhat make or break for him. I think he is a top 10 coach. I think he's the best coach in the NFL. I think that other coaches get more credit for appearing in a Super Bowl than he does for having actually won it. I think the Cowboys are in pretty good hands with him in this particular spot at head coach, but I think that there's a lot more that goes into a football team than just that. So I think he has his work cut out for him. But let's move to the defensive side of the ball first, because it does kind of feel like this is a really important thing here. Dan Quinn was amazing last year, and I don't want to, I'm not here to just poo-poo. I'm not here to just be negative. And I love Dan Quinn. I feel like he's amazing, but I feel like a lot of Cowboys fans can only credit one thing. Like, it seems like only one thing can be true to a lot of people, when the reality is multiple things can be true, right? It can be true that Mike McCarthy is a solid head coach and that Dan Quinn is a very good defensive coordinator. And a lot of people don't want to give that credit to everybody. A lot of people want to say, hey, look, McCarthy sucks. Dan Quinn is the only reason this team is good. He needs to be the team's head coach. And I would caution those people because we've given a lot of leeway to different defensive coordinators and defensive minds in the past, right? You look at the type of influence that Chris Richard was allowed to have, Rod Marinelli, Monty Kiffin. I mean, those things did not end well, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen here with Dan Quinn, but you have to be cautious with it. Dan Quinn's time with the Cowboys so far he's batting 1,000, right? Dan Quinn has played one game and has hit 4 home runs and 4 at-bats. He is on pace to only hit home runs ever, throughout his career, etc. And it's not a bad thing that he returned to the team. It's a very good thing. I'm very interested to see this. I'm so interested. I loved this hire. A lot of people loved this hire last year. I maintain that Dan Quinn is an incredible leader. Something that I don't think he gets enough credit for himself is, you hear every year about how teams who not just lose, but even win the Super Bowl, right? The Super Bowl participants generally have a hard time not only repeating, but getting back to the Super Bowl, right? It's so difficult for teams to get back to the Super Bowl, especially if they lose. And I don't think that we give enough credit to the 2017 Atlanta Falcons, all right? The Atlanta Falcons, it's hard to lose the Super Bowl, right? There's no easy way to lose the Super Bowl, but the Atlanta Falcons lost the Super Bowl in the most painful, memeable way in NFL history. 28-3, Tom Brady, ring number 5, blah, 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 collapse, Matt Ryan, the whole shebang, right? Well, do you know that the Falcons were a playoff team the next year? Because people don't remember that. They not only made it back to the playoffs, having overcome the worst Super Bowl loss in NFL history, they actually won a playoff game. Again, people don't give Dan Quinn enough credit for that. Do you know who they beat in that playoff game? The 2017 Atlanta Falcons. They beat Sean McVay's LA Rams in his first season with that team. And so I don't think that we've given enough credit to him. My biggest sort of quality that I was a fan of and in favor of with Dan Quinn arriving in Dallas a year ago was his leadership. I think he is an incredible leader. He's obviously a bright defensive mind, that goes without saying. And obviously having players like Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs and DeMarcus Lawrence and all this whole cast really allow him to do the things that he wants to do. The difficult thing, the difficult challenge, the challenge kind of encircling this team as a whole right now is, can the defense do it again? That is, the likelihood is probably not, right? If we're playing the odds, if we're looking at history, if we're looking at trends, the likelihood is that the defense is going to suffer some sort of regression to the mean. That isn't to say that they cannot be good, but that is just to say they will probably not be as amazingly good as they were in 2021. And if you need an example, I've said this before. A year ago, around this time, many people around the national media were picking the Washington football team to win the division. Think about it, right? I'm sure you got pissed off, right? At some point, you saw some national show, national radio, television show. Maybe it's a podcast. Said, I tell you what, and again, we're talking about a conversation a year ago. I tell you what, this Washington defense, it's amazing. And if Ryan Fitzpatrick can just come in and just kind of, steady the ship, just drive the bus. I could totally see them repeating as NFC East champions. And what happened to that defense? That Washington defense was amazing in 2020, but what happened in 2021? Regression to the mean. Actually, Washington went way past the mean, went way to the other end of the spectrum, but ultimately kind of came back to the mean as the season wore on. And that's my point. That's what we were arguing a year ago, right? We were telling all these people, how could you pick the football team to win? Because regression is likely coming for them on the defensive side of the ball. And it did. It comes for all great defenses. It's very possible, not very possible, it's possible that the 2022 Dallas Cowboys are the exception of the rule, but in all likelihood, they are not. So how is Dan Quinn going to bridge that gap? That is truly the biggest question and the biggest responsibility on his shoulders here in 2022. We now move to the offensive side of the ball. Kellen Moore entering his fourth season. And I think that's an important point. I don't think that we talk about that enough. Why, RJ? Why is it important that Kellen Moore is entering year 4? He's still like 25 years old. I know. Kellen Moore is incredibly young. And this isn't a bad thing. Look, we're just evaluating the coaching staff. And if we're looking at it, this is a coaching staff who failed last year, so there are some obvious flaws. The pros and the very good things that work in their favor are known. We know that Kellen Moore is an innovative offensive mind. But do you know how often it is that an offensive coordinator reaches a 4th year in the NFL? It is not all too often. Since 2008. All right, so since 2008, that is 14 years ago, 15 offensive coordinators who have been hired in that time have lasted more than 3 years with their respective team. Kellen Moore is now in that group because he's obviously past 3 years. This is his 4th season as offensive coordinator. Why, RJ? Why does that happen? Why do coordinators not last that long? Well, it's for one of two reasons. Because generally speaking, after 3 years, an offensive coordinator is either good enough that they have been hired away to be a head coach, right? If you have a lot of success, look at Mike McDaniel and the Miami Dolphins now, right? The young guys or whoever it is that just kind of shows up and takes the league by storm, they are hired to be an NFL head coach. Or after 3 years, that team has seen enough and they've moved on. But either way, at some point after 3 years, a team has made up their mind in a positive or negative way about offensive coordinators. I mean, there are 32 teams in the NFL, and not that every single one changes coordinators every year, but you're talking about since 2008, only 15 coordinators on the offensive side of the ball have lasted more than 3 years. And the Dallas Cowboys actually kind of like to do that. Jason Garrett, obviously was hired before 2008, but he lasted 4 seasons as the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator, 2007, 8, 9, and 10. Obviously was promoted to head coach as the interim that last season before taking over. Bill Callahan lasted 3 years for the Dallas Cowboys from 2012 to 2014. And what do you know it? Kellen Moore's predecessor, Scott Linehan, lasted 4 seasons as the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator. So the Cowboys have now had back-to-back offensive coordinators who have lasted longer than conventional wisdom would suggest. Now, Scott Linehan at one point in time was an amazing offensive coordinator. He was an amazing offensive mind. He helped find Kellen Moore as one example. But I'm not trying to be negative, but we've kind of, by this point, seen everything. We've seen Kellen Moore's offense evolve, but we've also seen where he's not going to evolve. We talk so much about everybody, how the Cowboys need to utilize Tony Pollard, get Tony Pollard involved, get Tony, Pollard. Do you know that Tony Pollard's entire career completely lines up with Kellen Moore's time as offensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys? Yeah, it does. Kellen Moore took over the team's offense in 2019. That was Tony Pollard's rookie year. His entire career as a Dallas Cowboy. This is just one example because you could point to a million. Again, we're just talking about points and methods of improvement here for this staff. We've kind of seen what the picture has to offer when it comes to Kellen Moore. And he may have more up his sleeve, no pun intended. He is an incredibly young head coach. He's still kind of finding himself. There's a huge argument to be made that as a coach, he hasn't even begun to scratch the surface of his peak because he is so young. So some of that data is kind of changing with the times, right? You're seeing all these influx of younger coaches, not just on the offensive side of the ball, but everywhere. And so this is a big year for Kellen Moore, right? If the coaching staff does make a change, if you believe that Sean Payton is going to be be the head coach of the future, that likely means Kellen Moore is gone. I mean, at one point in time, many people thought Kellen Moore was in line to become the future Dallas Cowboys head coach. I don't think any of us believe that right now. He's obviously an important part of this overall machine, but Kellen Moore, I mean, you can make a huge argument that he's the most important person, as far as coaches that we're discussing today, because this offense has to bounce back. This offense, and I don't want to pick on Kellen, but think back to last year, Thursday Night Football, when the Cowboys were in New Orleans taking on the Saints. You will recall that Mike McCarthy had to miss that game. He was on the COVID list. Dan Quinn served as the interim coach that night. The Cowboys won the game. It was a good thing. But the offense fell very flat. And I think that was a really big moment for Kellen Moore. And not that Mike McCarthy missing one game is a huge, massive thing in the conversation, but if the Cowboys offense had come out and just, was insane, all sorts of production with Mike McCarthy not there and Kellen Moore calling the shots, I think that really would have gone a long way towards supporting the idea that Kellen Moore could take over as the team's head coach. But we haven't seen that quite yet. Now, in Kellen's defense, he's had to deal with the transition from Jason Garrett to Mike McCarthy, but we're now entering year 3 with Mike McCarthy. We're now entering year 4 with Kellen Moore. He's got Dak Prescott. He's got CeeDee Lamb. He no longer has Amari Cooper. It's now time for Kellen Moore to kind of be the reason. It's time for Kellen Moore to innovate. We've seen his system have success, but we've also seen his system be tamed. It is time for Kellen Moore to think outside of what opposing defenses are throwing at him. But this takes us to our final coordinator that we are discussing here today, and that is special teams coordinator John Bones Fassel. If you follow me on Twitter, I have had some words to say about the Dallas Cowboys special teams over the last 2 years. Look, at the end of the day, as far as the group that John Fassel took over after the 2019 season, he has made them so much better, right? We all agree that the Cowboys special teams group has been responsible for momentum swings, right? Momentum changes. We've seen massive, big moments that the special teams group has commanded under John Fassel's tutelage. And you can make an argument that you're fine living with this, but where we have seen this side of the ball kind of hindered the team is they have been a little bit too aggressive. We've seen them kind of bite off a little bit more than they can chew. And the argument that you can make is you're fine living with that, right? It's a double-edged sword. I'm fine living with, the cons because the pros outweigh them, and I don't get the pros without the cons. I think that John Fassel, in that vein, has kind of become a little bit underrated. There are not many special teams coordinators that can impact a game the way he can. And again, sometimes it doesn't work out. But entering year 3, he no longer has Greg Zuerlein on his roster. And I think that's the interesting thing. We've seen there was nobody that defended Greg Zuerlein the way John Fassel did. So that factor is now gone. Can John Fassel take a rookie undrafted free agent kicker and Jonathan Garibay and turn him into the next great thing? I think he certainly is somebody who we can trust in that capacity. But it'll be interesting, to say the least. I'm not worried about special teams, not worried about John Fassel. It's just it's another phase of the ball. But that concludes our training camp preview here on the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel. We have talked quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, the secondary. We've now talked the coaches. We talked about the specialists. We talked about the entire roster, top to bottom, A to Z, 1 to infinity. We hit and covered it all, and it is now time for training camp to begin. Before the week starts, next week training camp week starts, of course, we're going to have one last training camp preview video, sort of. It's going to be a discussion. Myself, 3 other BTBers, going to kind of go through goals, wants, hopes, expectations for the 2022 Dallas Cowboys. Football season isn't here, but football season is here because training camp means that football is around the corner. Training camp more specifically means that football is happening, which means that we are happening here on the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel. We are ramping our coverage up because it is football season for us, which means it is football season for you. Let's celebrate. Let's enjoy it together. Let's have a great season. I don't know what's in store for us. All I know is I'm going to have a great time, and I'm going to have a great time sharing it with you. So my name is RJ Ochoa. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa, on TikTok at rj.ochoa. If email's more your thing, you can hit me up at rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. Please subscribe here to the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel. Like I said, we're going to be having so many more live shows. We'll be live just about every single weekday. In some capacity at some point or another. We'll have lots of discussions. We'll have Madden simulations this season. We got all sorts of fun stuff planned for you because football season is the best. Football season is the best, and it's even better when you get to experience it with people who you love and care about and respect, like we love and care about and respect each and every single one of you. But that's it. We did it. So let's get out of here, right? let's just do it. Let's just leave. Like, why are we sitting around here still continuing to ramble on and on? I really don't know. I really can't answer that question for you. All I know is it's exciting. The offseason both went by very slow and very fast at the same time, which is kind of strange. You never really think that would be the case, but sometimes time can be a little bit tricky that way. So shout out to the offseason for somewhat being fast. But anyway, we'll see you in our next training camp preview discussion as we tie a bow on all of it and get ready for training camp to start. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. See you next time.